think I would be a novelist over a documentarian. I love research. I love finding facts. I love gathering information, history, ideas, and yet that space of imagining is ultimately what's really important. And I like that openness, that invitation for someone to enter into the picture, relate, and empathize. I think that is such an important thing that fiction can do for us, is allow us to empathize and to see beyond facts and beyond one-dimensional thinking and really see metaphor, see the relation of things, see the gray. I've always looked to art history because I just love painting and I love paint. I love the materiality of it. I love stories. And I think it's, as a painter, especially as a figurative painter, there's a lot of history, a lot of baggage, but also a lot of inspiration in there. Things that are from hundreds of years ago suddenly seem very familiar. And I've let that become more present in the work, sort of quoting specific paintings or painters, different techniques, bringing all of that in. It's always there anyway. And I'm not really a painter who paints in one way. I've never wanted to define myself in a specific style or a specific approach. And so just pulling from this huge history across time, across places, different artists working in different places, it's just so much to pull from. So I'm looking most recently at a lot of Flemish painting, 16th century painting, and really looking at the kind of worlds that artists were imagining in those times. So I'm interested aesthetically in these pictures, but I'm also aware of the time that they were made, the things that might have been happening, the histories going on at that time that might have compelled people to work with a kind of symbolism. I think looking at a lot of Bruegel and some of his contemporaries and thinking about how they look to the past as well, bringing in myths, stories from the past, but bringing them into their own time and as a way of sort of making sense of their time, through some of these themes from the past. It makes maybe the traumas, the war, sort of the challenges of the times a little bit easier to talk about. When you have that quotation from the past, you're able to suddenly understand a little bit about what your time is, actually. There are things that stay the same and things that change, but when you do recognize those things that stay the same, the beautiful moments, the interactions between figures, as well as some of the conflicts that sort of recur over and over again. There is something connective about that through time. And when these artists are also quoting biblical stories or myths, it's sort of that same tendency that I recognize and I think is really, really valuable to look back at history. Not that it has the answers, but I think it can be humbling and it can give us some distance as well to see our own times. I think I've always painted or drawn. I've just always been interested in making things. And I think it was part of my personality also growing up, just being a very introverted kid and quiet, and drawing was just always there. It's immediate, and it's just a way to put in time. You know, it's something to be doing. I feel like I had a very unstructured childhood, and so it was just a way to imagine, really, a way to play, to invent, and it's continued to kind of be that for me. It's a way to be in the world, to make rules for myself, to think about things, to take what I'm seeing or experiencing and make something from it. The process of the paintings is layered. Recently, there's been many steps before I'm reaching the final painting, and so often it will start with an art historical painting, something that has a history to it, oftentimes recognizable, so that a viewer will sort of have a history with that. There'll be a collective memory of this picture. And from that, I'm adding my own sort of characters into this stage. And so I've been looking at archived photographs, and I've been following some of these figures in these photographs over many years. And so I'm sort of watching the story of their lives at this point unfold a little bit. For me, working with the photographs is a very different experience than painting from life. When I'm looking through these photographs and collecting them, there's hints to a bigger story, but it's unknowable. The whole situation is unknowable. And so they're kind of mysterious in a way. There's so much to fill in, and that allows for fiction to sort of develop. And so I'm relating to it. I love research, and so I'm trying to learn as much about the image, the photographer, that situation, that instant where the camera clicked. But it's also about the freedom for me to then interpret it and to almost think of them as characters in a play or on a stage, and that these figures can enact something when I relate them to each other. And so the paintings are compiled of art historical references, photographic references, and brought together in a way of storytelling. The actual paint application, the language that I'm using in each painting, again, is layered. And I think it has to do with the collage that's also part of my process. And so I also make collage paintings reusing surfaces from paintings that have failed, paintings that are on wood, and cutting them up physically, using those as physical brushstrokes that I can then move around in a different way. And so I have this accompanying practice of making pictures with pieces. And that comes through when I approach the larger, more traditional paintings. where there's more of a conscious awareness of edges, of the way that brushstrokes almost become a physical thing, because I have been handling them and moving them around. And so there's so many languages that are coming into the picture. I think the collage is a really interesting media because it's so fractured. And metaphorically, I think that's just a really strong quality of collage. The idea of bringing things together and letting the seams show, letting many planes move in space, maybe in ways that aren't expected or rational. And so it really resists coalescing into a single image. It makes us move around the picture in a different way. And so that collage aspect comes through in the way that the paintings are constructed. As I'm moving from one area to another, thinking about a certain part of the picture that can almost seem separate, and allowing that to be. Not, things don't have to come together. I think memory is similar to collage, that bits of information are coming together, that we weigh them differently, that they change as well, that they're not solid. And that's another thing that I think about in the paintings, that forms aren't entirely solid, that forms sort of move into other forms. And sometimes there's transparencies that are confusing, and I think memory can act in that way as well, that it's not a complete picture. It's moving all the time. It's shifting. Right. I do hope that people are able to reflect on their own time looking at these pictures. And I'm referencing a lot of photographs. My figures are from photographs of individuals from the 60s and 70s right now. And one of the main themes of the current series of paintings is the idea of starting anew, sort of finding new ways of being. And I've been looking at these peace activists who were present in previous series of my work, in parades and crowds and very active type of demonstration. And then following through in their lives through photographs, through the stories they wrote, poetry, other archived material, you can see them become disenchanted with the systems that they've created, the groups that they've become, the limited change that they were able to create. And instead of becoming entirely bitter or giving up, they sort of retreat to nature, and there's this movement of back to the land. And for me, that's a really interesting type of protest, that quiet protest that's also very, very strong and important, especially for us today. And so I'm following these figures also from the past, but it always mirrors things that are happening now. And so there's never a moral that I'm trying to communicate, illustrate with the paintings. It's more appreciating an effort that was made from the past. And in some ways, a failed effort, not an entirely successful effort, but an ambition. And I think that's something that, especially today, is really lacking, that we can sort of have the audacity to do things differently, even though it might not succeed, and to be okay with failure, to have that kind of humility, I think, is really important right now as we think about all the problems for the future generations to solve. It's celebrating that kind of seeking and ambition. And that real change, I think real meaningful, deep change often comes from moving towards something versus pushing something away. And it's through through hope, through love, through something positive, that things actually stick, that actually can mobilize long term. I think the idea of active protest is important, but thinking sort of as a lasting change, that there has to be a real depth in hope, in the idea of moving towards something versus away from something. So instead of fear and anger, which is so present, rather than resting in that, to sort of bravely find something else to actually put in place of that, to put ahead of that, and that's where change will happen. The role of painting in making big change is difficult, because I always think of painting especially, but art, as being slow. And maybe it's more individual. That change also comes through accumulated individuals. And that's for me, the strength of art, is that individual interaction, that can expand when that happens often. But for me, painting is not a loud voice usually. It's usually a quieter voice, and it's a slower voice. And I think there's also strength in that. It's a different way of communicating that we don't, it's not at the forefront, right? But it is, I think, so important. I don't know that I see these paintings as proposing any kind of answers. I think I do remain hopeful, although it's difficult at times. I try to have a wide view of history, and living in this country especially, it's challenging to be hopeful sometimes. But at the same time, I think there are countries, but then there's people who make up the countries, and we're part of that. And so I think as much as I can think of myself as being a part of that, not us, them, but myself being sort of implicated in everything, that it is all related. I think that can help me resist the hopelessness that could easily overwhelm you. So I don't know that the paintings propose any kind of answers as much as maybe appreciating the layeredness of things, the complication of things, and that things move in cycles. I think another thing that has been introduced in the paintings recently is the issue of, or the idea of change, the idea of cycles, the idea of things happening over and over again, and thinking about progress as not a destination, but something that's a little bit more layered and complicated, and understanding human nature in that. And seeing that not as a failure again, but as somehow a beautiful part of being a human.